A company on the brink of bankruptcy designed in 49 days the vehicle that would change World War II and didn't manufacture a SI Ingle L1. Zero.
The United States government stole the blueprints, legally, and handed them over to Ford and Willys-Overland. Result? 640,000 identical units that crossed every beach, every forest, and every desert of the war. Bolt by bolt, piece by piece, all interchangeable, all compatible. The Jeep didn't win races. It wasn't the fastest or the most comfortable. But a soldier with a wrench could rip the parts off another destroyed Jeep, mount his own, and get back into combat in minutes. It didn't need specialized mechanics. It didn't need exclusive parts. Any bolt from any Army Jeep fit into any other. Like a Lego with wheels in the middle of a war. While the Germans relied on over 100 different vehicle models, a logistical hell where every broken part paralyzed an entire unit, the Americans only needed to memorize one manual.
Look, what you have here is not a car story bidet. It's a textbook case about who controls the standard. Bantam had designed the absolutely perfect product, but the government understood something that most entrepreneurs out there don't see. The best product doesn't win. The most scalable system wins.
When the government decided that 3 different factories were going to produce the same car with the same parts, they weren't building a vehicle. They were building a platform. And that, in systems analysis, has a name: Logistics Domination Architecture. To understand the scale of the disaster, you have to go back to 1940 and forget everything you know about the American military. Because at that moment, that military that today has bases in 80 countries was a joke. The 16th largest in the world, behind Romania, behind Portugal. We're talking about a country with the largest industrial economy on the planet that couldn't move a platoon without depending on mules and horses. Europe was already in flames. France had fallen in 6 weeks, and the German panzers had proven that modern war was won with mobility, not with muscle, not with courage, but with the ability to put fast machines where the enemy didn't expect you. And the U.S. War Department looked at its inventories and saw heavy trucks that got stuck on any unpaved road, rusty sidecars from World War I, and a humiliating collection of requisitioned civilian vehicles that couldn't even cross a mud field. The richest army in the world had no way to move. The solution was obvious. They needed a light, all-terrain, cheap vehicle that was easy to mass produce. But what happened next was a textbook disaster, because the Army, in its infinite bureaucratic wisdom, launched a call with a deadline of 49 days to submit a working prototype. Not a drawing, not a concept. A car that would start, cross mud, and hold the weight of 3 soldiers with full gear. 49 days to design from scratch a vehicle that had never existed. Only 135 car manufacturers received the invitation, and 134 said no. The big ones, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, didn't even bother to respond. The deadline was, effectively, impossible. Who was crazy enough, or desperate enough, to accept? American Bantam, a tiny company from Butler, Pennsylvania, that had been on the brink of bankruptcy for years, with fewer than 15 employees and a half-abandoned factory. They had no money, no spare engineers, no infrastructure, but they had hunger. And in 1940, with the world splitting in two, that was worth more than any budget. Bantam hired a freelance engineer named Carl Probst, a guy who initially rejected the project because he thought it was suicidal madness, until the president of Bantam convinced him there was no one else. Probst accepted and started working without a guaranteed contract during the first weeks. Probst locked himself in the Butler factory and designed the prototype in an engineering marathon that today would be the envy of any Silicon Valley startup. Complete blueprints in 5 days. No computers, no simulations, with a slide rule and coffee, and a prototype rolling in 49 days. One man, a dying factory, and a deadline that no Detroit giant had dared to accept. And here's the first blow. Bantam's prototype worked. It passed the Army's tests at Camp Holabird, Maryland. It was exactly what they had asked for. Light, all-terrain, reliable.
Bantam should have won the biggest contract in its history? See the trap? Bantam did exactly what the market demanded. Delivered on time, met specifications, passed the tests. In any normal market, that gets you the contract.
But this is where political power enters the game. Bantam could manufacture maybe 15 cars a day, and the Army needed thousands per week. Bantam had the best product, but it didn't have the capacity. And when power needs scale, individual merit is the first thing it sacrifices. See where the game is? But what Bantam didn't know is that the Army had been playing 3 sides from the very beginning. While Bantam was sweating blood to meet that impossible deadline, the War Department had quietly invited 2 other competitors to submit their own prototypes. Willys-Overland, a veteran brand also in serious financial trouble, and Ford. Henry Ford's industrial giant with factories capable of churning out thousands of vehicles a day. And not only that, it had given them direct access to the blueprints and technical specifications of Bantam's design. Read that again. The government took Bantam's intellectual property, a private company that had invested its last breath in developing that prototype, and handed it over to its direct competitors. Without permission, without proportional compensation, with total legal impunity. Because in pre-war times, the military acquisition clauses allowed exactly that. Democracy has these little details when it suits it. Now they had 3 prototypes on the table. The Bantam BRC-40, the original, the Willys MA, and the Ford GP. 3 different cars, 3 incompatible part systems, 3 different logistics chains. And this is where the real problem explodes. If you send 3 different vehicles to the front and a Willys part breaks, Ford parts don't work. Bantam parts don't either. Every broken car on the battlefield is a dead car, a stranded soldier, a failed mission. And in a war where the speed of repair defines who advances and who dies, that's not a technical problem. It's a death sentence. Multiply that by 10,000 vehicles spread across North Africa, the Pacific, and Europe, and you have a logistical nightmare of biblical proportions.
Imagine you have 3 suppliers for your business, and each one uses a different file format, FRIAT. It can't scale, can't substitute, can't grow. What the Army needed wasn't the best car. It needed one system, a part that fit any chassis, an engine that could be swapped between any unit. And to achieve that, someone had to lose their identity. The question is, who decides the rules of the Ledo?
The United States government did something that in any other context would have provoked a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. And it did it with total bureaucratic coldness. They took the 3 prototypes, put them on the table, and said, "This is no longer a competition. This is a forced merger. The best car or the best company is not going to win. We're going to take the best of each design and create a single standard vehicle that anyone can manufacture. One single manual, one single part system, one single monster replicable to infinity. Welcome to Open Source, version 1941. The Army's Standardization Committee took apart the 3 prototypes piece by piece and began to select like someone building a Frankenstein with the best parts of each corpse. The Willys engine, a 4-cylinder Go Devil that gave more torque than the other 2 and started cold at 20 below zero, stayed. Bantam's chassis, lighter, more agile, designed by a freelance engineer in 5 days with a slide rule, served as the dimensional reference. And Ford, with its colossal industrial capacity and assembly lines capable of churning out a vehicle every few minutes, would mass-produce what the other 2 couldn't even dream of. It wasn't consensus engineering. It was selective plunder engineering. Each company lost control of its design to feed a monster bigger than any of them. And the most brutal part? None of the 3 had the option to refuse. There was no voluntary agreement. There was a military decree. Bantam, Willys, and Ford stopped competing against each other to compete over who manufactured the same thing faster. Like when an entire industry adopts the same charging port or the same data protocol, but at the point of a government contract.
See the play? If you control the standard, you don't need the factories. Then they work F or your standard. And now comes the part that changed the war.
The government took the best of each design, merged it into a single standard vehicle, and gave it a name: Willys MB. Then it made exact copies of those blueprints and handed them to Ford, which manufactured the same car under the name Ford GPW. The W literally stood for Willys, because even the name carried the DNA of the standard. It wasn't that one factory made the engine and another the chassis. Both produced the complete car, from start to finish, with the same parts, the same measurements, and the same manual. 2 assembly lines in 2 different cities churning out the same vehicle as if they were industrial photocopiers. If a Willys Jeep blew up in Normandy, a soldier could drag over another wrecked Ford GPW, rip out the carburetor, and mount it in his own in less than an hour, without special tools, without waiting weeks for a replacement from Detroit. Because every part from one fit perfectly in the other. And this is where the system shows its true power. While the Germans operated with over 100 different military vehicle models, each with its specific parts, its own manual, its specialized mechanics, the Americans flooded every front with 640,000 units of a single design. In North Africa, in Italy, on the beaches of Normandy, in the jungles of the Pacific, the same car, the same parts, the same 74-page manual that any soldier with minimal training could follow. If a Jeep died, another Jeep brought it back to life. Every destroyed vehicle automatically became a warehouse of spare parts for the survivors. It wasn't repair, it was industrial cannibalism organized on a planetary scale. The Germans needed factories, intact supply chains, and specialized mechanics for each model. The Americans only needed a wrench and another Jeep nearby. The Jeep wasn't the best car on the battlefield. The German Kugelwagen were lighter, the British vehicles more refined. But none of them could do this. None was a Lego that rebuilt itself with the parts of its own dead.
Look, in any business, there's an obsession with having the best product, but there's something more powerful than excellence: compatibility. And that, in system terms, is a competitive advantage that no individual product can beat.
And Bantam? The company that started it all? The one that designed the original prototype? The one that hired Karl Probst? The one that risked its last breath on those impossible 49 days? Didn't manufacture a single Jeep. Zero. The government assigned it minor contracts for trailers and auxiliary components. The crumbs of the feast it had cooked itself, while Ford and Willys divided the hundreds of thousands of units between them. Bantam survived the war producing parts for the vehicle it had invented, but it never recovered. It closed for good in 1956, forgotten by the industry and by history. Meanwhile, Willys-Overland, a company that before the war was on the brink of bankruptcy just like Bantam, became a global synonym for off-road vehicle. The difference between the two wasn't talent or ingenuity or effort. It was industrial capacity. The name Jeep went from military slang to registered trademark to vehicle category to cultural icon that today bills billions under the Stellantis umbrella. All thanks to a government contract that Willys didn't win on its own merit, but because it had the engine the government chose to put inside a standard that belonged to no one and to everyone. And now the question that matters. What system did the U.S. government discover in 1941 that still works in every industry dominating the market?
T1. Whoever controls the standard controls the chain. No need to be best if everyone produces YoOR design.
Apple doesn't manufacture its iPhones. Foxconn does. But Apple controls the standard, the ecosystem, the specifications, and keeps 80% of the margin. Amazon doesn't need to have the best product on its platform. It controls the platform itself. The American Army discovered this logic 80 years before Silicon Valley, with a $2,000 car in the middle of a world war.
Key 2. Compatibility kills excellence.
The Jeep wasn't the best battlefield vehicle, but it was the only one that could rebuild itself with parts from another destroyed Jeep. In a system where the speed of recovery matters more than peak performance, the modular product always beats the brilliant but isolated product.
The third key lesson: the innovator doesn't always get to keep the tries.
Bantam designed the prototype, risked everything it had, delivered first and best, and was devoured by the very system it helped create. Karl Probst, the engineer who drew it in 5 days, received not a single patent, not a royalty, not an official recognition for decades. In a market where power needs scale, the first to arrive sometimes only proves the path is viable, for others to walk it with more muscle.
Ask yourself this question, Tive, and ask it seriously. Are you building something that only you can manufacture? Or are you building a system that anyone could replicate but that you control? Because Bantam built the best Jeep, and Ford and Willys built 640,000. Merit doesn't win wars. No, scale does.